healing's hard.
Yeah.
It's painful, and I would say that it gets worse before it gets better. It feels lonely because as you start to have boundaries and understand your limits, some people have to leave your life and some relationships have to be dissolved in order for you to expand. So it's not for the weak of heart to do a healing journey. Our brain is remarkable at keeping us in survival, and it doesn't want us to see the things that it doesn't want us to see. And it thinks, why would you intentionally review this? It's over. What I can say, though, is that in the healing, though it is painful, if the circumstance that you were in at that moment was 100% painful, recalling it, though painful, is only 99% painful. It's a memory of the pain. But the only way to process that is to really go back to the memory and compost it. But we can't do it alone.
Hey friends, welcome back to the next episode of our Flourish podcast. I'm so excited to have with us here today Sandra Majorana. She is with us today all the way from Edmonton. And if you don't know, of course, you wouldn't maybe know because we're filming this in June, but we're right in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yes.
And last night, Edmonton just lost game 2. But hey, we're all Albertans and we're cheering for Edmonton. Go Edmonton. So they got time. But Sandra drove all the way down from Edmonton this morning and wanted to be with us today. We're so grateful for her presence. And Sandra, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, how was the drive?
The drive it's a beautiful day. I hear there's a storm on the way home that I'll try to miss, but
okay.
Yeah, no, it was a perfect drive this morning.
Yeah, those storms can be pretty crazy, especially in where we live. We can get some pretty crazy hailstorms and then in the winter, snowstorms and ice and all of that. But anyways, Sandra, you and I met, I believe it was 2013, right around there, a long time ago. And we've been in contact ever since then. And so we are so blessed to have you as part of our community. And we'll talk about all of those things. But it'd be awesome to share a little bit about your story, because I think you have a great story. And it's not like a flashy story, but it's a very meaningful, powerful story that can really help people. So yeah, where would you like to begin?
I guess we can begin at the beginning. In listening to your story over the years, there's so many nuances. Obviously, it's not exactly the same, but lots of nuances that are the same. I am a daughter of a woman who was 16 when she was pregnant with me. And back in the day, that wasn't really an acceptable thing. So it was a life-changing place for her. She was kicked out of her home. She was kicked out of high school. So just even the experience of me in her womb was of somebody that was a terrified young woman.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather had also sent away my biological father, and so she was a single mom on her own in those days. And so that was the beginning. I speak to trauma a lot, and how our stories affect our life. So that was the beginning of life, was knowing really that I wasn't wanted, that I was a problem, that I was a burden. My mom has a lot to speak to. I was the cause of so many losses in her life. So my life going forward was about me staying small, kind of being invisible, making sure I was good. And I speak to trauma a little bit about it's the thing that changes who you could become. And when I understood that I was a burden and not wanted, I became very small in my life. Fast forward that way, we were alone for 6 years. I was then adopted. My stepfather came into our life, and he's an Italian Catholic man that was a part of some of the things I'm recovering from culturally. It's interesting, but different cultures do different things with women and with children.
Sure.
And then raised Catholic, and I don't know. There's a lot there about also of my journey with God and in religion. So I was in that family. My mom was an alcoholic when she was pregnant with me. That just exacerbated itself, and she is still suffering from her addiction and actually has dementia from the brain damage done through that. But there's a lot of abuse, and with her specifically, And my father as a stepfather was just kind of passive. I think he didn't know that where the lines were of where he got to step in, and they had their own 2 children after that. But it was quite a violent childhood that I had with my mother. And there was a day that I decided I had to leave home. I had an incident with my mom, and my stepfather for the first time had stepped in, and he had beaten me. And I just thought, if a man's going to start beating me, I'm out of here. He, to that day, had never touched me, but I had fought back against my mom for the first time, and that was disrespectful to him. And so that was a really, really tragic beating. And I ended up at the bottom of the stairs, 2 stories down from where he had thrown me over, and nobody came to pick me up. Nobody came to check on me. So I packed my bags. I had babysitting money, and I was 17 in my grade 12 year, and I waited till 5 o'clock in the morning, and I left. The buses were going to start to run, and I went to school, and I didn't know where life would lead me from there. I knew I wasn't going back. So that was the beginning of the journey where I knew that things had to change, that I didn't want that to be the rest of my life. And I finally, having left the situation, got to be the adult and empowered and start to make decisions for my life and towards my life. So a lovely family took me in and let me finish grade 12 there. And so I did get to have my education, which my mother didn't get to have. So it was all these things where what was going to get me out of the situation, and education was one of those things. I didn't want to be a part of poverty. I didn't want to be a part of addiction. I didn't want to be a part of abuse that way. So education seemed to be the way out of that. So I made sure to finish my high school education. Struggled a bit financially. There was a place where I lived in a car in transitional places of my life while I was going to NAIT and again upgrading my education. So I know some poverty. And again, wanted to break that cycle. Want to stay in that realm. It limits the experiences that you can have in life and the healing that you can do with the people and resources that you need to do that. So I continued my education. I got married at 23, which is quite young to get married. And I was in that marriage for 28 years. We were together for 34, and that dissolved itself in COVID. And I can speak to a lot of the things that happened in that marriage were from the childhood experience. In my marriage, it replicated staying small, and that's where I'll speak to the Italian part of that is I always wanted to be a mom and a stay-at-home mom, and I got to do that, which I was really, really super grateful for. But it was one of those things where you're just kind of an old saying of cliche of barefoot and pregnant. And I was really minimized that way. As much as it's a super valuable role and it's everything I wanted to do, it replicated my childhood experience of staying small, staying quiet, staying behind the scenes of somebody else's life. So that had some hard times with that. I have 3 children, and that's the place where, again, our childhood experiences and our life experiences mirrored to us with our children. And I didn't think that I would have capacity to make some of the mistakes that my mom had made. But I did, and I started to repeat some of those things. And it was unforgivable to me. I didn't have a lot of compassion for myself because I didn't have addiction issues. I didn't have limitations in my income. I had my education. So how is it that I could come to be in these situations where I was repeating trauma that I absolutely wanted nothing to do with? So I started my healing journey. My oldest son was in grade 6 or 6 years old at the time. Okay. And that's where they start to gain their independence. So I could claim that I was a really good mom until my kids were school age and they had other influences and they saw other ways of being. And it started to really challenge what I had in terms of boundaries and experience of nurturing and helping our children to flourish. I was a fear-based, very fear-based parent. And so I actually my son came out of his room. I was in whatever shape I was in that particular morning, and I was like, we gotta go. And I was holding his arms, and I left 10 fingerprint marks in his arms that day. And my husband had forgotten something from work, and he got home and saw that this was the behavior I had. And he gently invited me into figuring it out and starting to get some help. And so that was a place. I had been in and out of counseling. I had been in and out of therapy. I was always trying to be expanding and leaving behind the hard things. But that's when I found Denise, who's my counselor. She ended up being my mentor and teacher of a certification that I have called PRH, accompanist. And that was the first place that I was seen and heard, and she held space for me. And I felt hope for the first time that I could actually stop the cycles of trauma and recreate something for myself that was different, and that there was actually purpose. So I started my journey with Denise and PRH, and that was really a 12-year journey of systematically healing. Everything in life is relational. And so it's relationships with people and with women and men and authority and religion and nature and money, and everything is relational. So that's where I started to be able to recognize that there was another way as well. I had a client last week speak to me, and he said there was something that he thought I'd be interested in, and it was that there was only one road. And I stopped for a minute and I thought, yeah, you're right. Everybody says, oh, you could have gone the other way. But in that moment, there was the only road. And it's a survival road initially until you can expand and see that life is bigger and that there's other ways to do things. So yeah, that was the journey that started a whole bunch of healing for me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's just profound. And I'm sorry that you had to experience all those things or did experience those things. I think what could be helpful, I mean, there's so many things that could be, but to think about, what are some of the things that you learned about your own healing along the way? Because I mean, it's not like you're completely healed, but you've absolutely come a long way, and you're now helping so many. And, as somebody might be listening and maybe pulling out pieces where they can see some similarity in their own journey, their own story. I mean, even what you talked about from the trauma that we experience or can experience in our own mother's womb. And I think there's a lot of people, they're trying to figure out, like, why do I feel these things? Why do I act this way? And you may not even be aware of some of the underlying drivers or influencers, right? And so, yeah, for somebody who's listening in and their interest is, they're curious, what are some things that they might want to think about in their journey?
We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to work in a flourishing workplace. For so many, the workplace drains them and drags them down, rather than being a place where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone thrives. When you have a workplace like that, not only will it be positive, productive, and profitable, but you will be contributing to the mental health and well-being of every single person on your team. At Flourishing Workplace, we are changing the world by changing the workplace. Book a discovery call today and find out how we can help you create a workplace where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone thrives.
What I have felt to be the most important thing is to be witnessed. We have to journey with somebody. It's in relationship that we're harmed, and it's in relationship that we're healed and redeemed. And so this has been expansive for me, being a part of the Flourishing team since 2013. I had done all the PRH work from 2000 to 2012, and then I wanted to be able to do something really impactful and powerful with that. And it was having people to collaborate with and being witnessed. And it's kind of the tree in the forest. If the tree, and no one was there to hear it, did it really fall? And so I have a philosophy that we need to be heard and seen and believed. And it's emotionally as important as food, water, and oxygen to our physical body. And so otherwise we live alone, it's a really lonely, can be really lonely.
Right.
And so that's where I finally had the healing, is when someone held space for me, someone offered me empathy and compassion. They offered me non-judgment. They really just heard what I had to say and saw. And believed is super important too, because in our society, I feel like there's a lot of comparison, and even comparison of trauma. And my story isn't as bad as your story, or my story is worse than your story. And that's not the truth about that. And so what I bring to clients when I think is important in healing as well is that you're believed that what you went through was horrific for you.
Right.
And to be able to have somebody hold space for you. And when somebody holds space for you, you then allow yourself and give yourself permission to hold space for yourself. And a lot of compassion about all the limits that you had in those moments.
Right.
At the time, we're only as strong as our weakest limit until we start to remove those limitations.
Yeah. And why have you found that some people try to take that journey alone? You know, it's like, well, I'm going to heal, but I'm just going to heal all by myself. And what have you found?
Healing's hard.
Yeah. Right.
Healing's hard.
Yeah.
It's painful, and I would say that it gets worse before it gets better. And I do warn people in my office that this gets worse before it gets better. Sometimes it feels lonely, because as you start to have boundaries and understand your limits, some people have to leave your life, and some relationships have to be dissolved,
Right.
in order for you to expand. So it's not for the weak.
Right.
For the weak of heart to do a healing journey. The thing is that our brain is remarkable at keeping us in survival, and it doesn't want us to see the things that it doesn't want us to see. And it thinks, why would you intentionally review this?
Right.
It's over.
Yeah.
What I can say, though, is that in the healing, though it is painful, if the circumstance that you were in at that moment was 100% painful, recalling it, though painful, is only 99% painful. It's a memory of the pain. But the only way to process that is to really go back to the memory and compost it. But we can't do it alone. And so many people try, but when they come up against the consequences of it, even for me in some of my emotional healing, I've had physical responses and illnesses due to that. Just last year, 2022 maybe, I had adrenal fatigue, and that was a compilation of my trauma and my life story and the work that I was doing. And it was actually Denise that said, enough work for now. You have to take a step back from that.
Yeah.
Because it does take a toll. Our stories live in our body.
Yeah. So tell us about that. Our stories live in our body.
Yeah, I get really passionate about that. In the philosophy that I've taught and created, I divide us into a body, a brain, our heart, and then our being. And the body is the thing that carries our story. Right. And we should, that's where a lot of my self-care lecturing will come into place, is that it had that live experience. And it's where disease sits and holds and manifests. I'll speak to a lot of research being done in my own physical experience of, in a place, I don't have a thyroid. My thyroid was removed. My disease manifested there, and it's not a coincidence that it's over my throat. That is where I spoke. And when I was trying to stay small in all parts of my life, I was actually mute. And so the disease here, it manifested itself where the surgeon said, the only real risk in this surgery is if I nick your vocal cords, you will be without a voice. And I, at the time, was like, are you kidding me? I'm finally starting to speak, and I have something to say, and it's powerful and meaningful. Yeah. And this is when this is going to manifest. Right. And so, I have that experience. I know that like people who have been sexually abused, or, just to speak to women who have been sexually abused, will most likely die of a feminine-related cancer. There's cervical cancers and breast cancers. So our body, it takes it holds it, and it holds it in the place that it occurred. And even emotionally, if there had been, say, a betrayal in your life, or you felt like you had been kicked in the stomach, you'll get irritable bowel syndrome. You'll get digestive issues. You'll get stomach cancer, because where your body felt that. And in therapy, I'll say to people, where are you feeling that right now? They'll have trembling legs, or they'll have the stomach ache. They'll feel like they're being suffocated. They can't breathe. Express language like it feels like I'm drowning. And so, yeah, our body takes seriously what happens. And it's only my philosophy, but I've started to think with the mental illness, because it seems to be an epidemic, that, and our brain is an organ equal to our stomach or our heart or anything else, that when our brain has too much and it's had to carry too much and the story has been there and it hasn't been unpacked, that it shuts down. And it so I explain a version of depression where it's just there's no more capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't get out of bed in the morning, if you don't leave your house, if you don't go to that party, you don't have to take in anything else. And so it's a dummying down of that. And on the other side of that, when we're just full, when we're full of emotions or feelings or experiences or the history of our life, it comes out as an anxious thing. But those are all, if we start to do the healing work, even our brain can start to be healed of those things.
Yeah, which is awesome, right? There's hope. Yeah, and so for your, because we have the privilege, everybody, of doing a few episodes with Sandra, and really excited about that. So we're going to, she'll have a lot of opportunity to unpack her business and the work she does. And it's really so much more than a business. And then also to talk about the program that she's describing. I guess in your own life, what have been some of the, your greatest learnings that have helped you to heal, and things that you're continuing to learn?
Some of my biggest learnings include learning to love myself, to reconnect to myself. I feel like in trauma, we have to separate from ourselves and the core of who we are. We're perfectly made and we're perfectly intact. And something that I've learned is that no matter what has happened to me, that the core of who I am is unchanged. And if we water and fertilize it and start to care for it in ways that it should have been cared, that who you are and who you came here to become is always, always possible. So that's intact.
Love that.
A lot of things that I had to learn were language. My language was really derogatory. It's a huge thing that I'm really passionate about now is language. I was called a slut as a child, or I was called fat and ugly, pathetic, a whole bunch of words, and that was the language, and that's what I knew how to respond to. So to learn that I was deserving, that I was valuable, that I was lovable. So learning language was super important, coming from where I came from. And gratitude and forgiveness. I don't think those were in my vocabulary either. And again, in the program and in my own life, those were some of the biggest healing tools, was learn to get to a place to be grateful for what I've gone through, to be grateful for my learnings, and then to recognize how courageous that I am and that I have a lot of strengths. And so coming from where I wouldn't have been able to speak to you to anything that was good of me, that I had any value at all. To be here is really, in my experience, a miracle. To be sitting with you, to be having made the program, to have healed as much as I have healed. That there's loss, there's a lot of loss. I've learned about loss. And so then you learn about grieving. And ultimately forgiveness, just forgiveness over and over again. And not necessarily just of the people that were a part of your trauma, but of yourself. And one of the things I had to learn after my marriage dissolved was to accept what was mine, but to not carry it forward. It doesn't serve me to carry. It only serves me to learn from it and expand, and to take that information and to leave everybody intact as much as you can, to not cause more trauma on the way out of it. Trauma begets trauma, anger begets anger, love begets love, and forgiveness gets that too. So those are some of my pivotal learnings.
Those are profound, to say the least, and lots to chew on. Well, I'm excited to continue this conversation in our next episode, and really we wanted this one to begin just really understanding, your journey. And I think you've given me lots to think about. Any final thoughts for anyone who might be viewing in here today?
It's never too late to start healing. Until the last breath we take on this earth,
Not that.
We can grow and we can heal and we can stop generational trauma, and we need to start coming together as a collective.
Yes.
And to be conscious and mindful of what people have gone through and your own story. And we're all really more alike than we are different.
So true. And so how, do you have a website or anything we can share with the folks here today? Tell us your website.
I do. It's sandramethod.com.
Yeah. sandramethod.com. Okay. Yeah.
And it was lovely. My daughter came on board and she's one of my biggest cheerleaders. So
That's awesome.
she created that for me. It's very personal. I'm very much about relationships and building rapport. So.
And honestly, in our next episode, Sandra will talk a bit about "quote unquote" her business. It's a lot more, a lot less about a business for her, and a lot more about serving and helping people. But you'll hear, I'm sure he'll talk about the fact that it's not some kind of mass marketing campaign. It's all around personal referrals and just one person talking to another. But, I want to encourage you. I want to personally refer you to Sandra and her website, sandramethod.com, because there's no doubt that, some of us need to heal. And that doesn't mean that we're broken, and it doesn't mean that we're unworth it or not. We're not worth it. It actually means the opposite. It's that, sometimes we can't really thrive until what has been done to us can be properly addressed and we heal. And this is a wonderful human being, I think, who would love to take that journey with you. So any final thoughts here today? I always ask people that. So
No, I'm good for now.
she's good. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of the Flourish Podcast. And please tune in to our next one. We're going to continue this conversation, but give you lots to think about, lots to reflect on, lots to journal around. And we'll see you in our next episode. Thank you so much.